If you think that death and grief are interior, secret, and non-translatable, other things follow from that. I want you to learn how to track thinking. If death is essentially asocial, that means it's an event that doesn't happen in history or society, what would that indicate about its nature and meaning? Where would it get its meaning?
That would be something inherent in it.
Good, something inside. Nice thinking. This is what I want you guys to start doing. You have to follow the path. If you plump for this, certain things follow, and you have to think about what follows from the assumption that death is interior for grief. Interior. That means it has some inside order that is pre-symbolic, non-linguistic, but there in the first place. It's natural, we'll have to say, because it's not social, it's not historic, it's not a construct, it's kind of a pure, spontaneous nature of grieving or nature of dying that comes to us when we're doing it. It's a matter of interior experience. And in that sense, it can't really be fully translated because it comes from deep inside. Most of you probably have some version of this in your set of concepts when you approach any profound experience. We like to think that there's something unreachable inside us that is very special and that has a kind of natural progression to it, to which only we have access, and which has a kind of built-in authenticity. And you do believe that, and you're trapped in that kind of template. Now, if you say that's probably not true, or the private and interior life is a function of social construction or cultural and historical forces, what you're saying is your private feelings aren't that private. They're versions of something anybody who's a upper middle class, relatively white American in 2012 living in Southern California might feel. That you're part of a subset of moves that you can make both emotionally and every other way that are derivative from a larger model. Most of us hate that idea because that undercuts the notion of a kind of primitive and natural individuality. We like to think we're spontaneous. We love Ayn Rand. The imagination that everybody has a kind of inner, pure selfiness to get out there. Johnston operated that model. But there's certain kinds of assumptions you make and certain kinds of consequences that follow from that. And you have to think, when you think about your own relationship to death, where do I stand in this? Okay? Where do I stand in this template? On the assumption that Bradbury makes is nobody escapes history. Yes?
Wouldn't we assume that Bradbury would do that since she's a social psychologist?
Absolutely. Now, the question is, why is she one? Why do you think she picked that rather than therapy and natural hangings on the wall and speaking to you one-on-one?
Maybe she had more, she like researching.
What's her hunch about reality that drives her in that direction? This is a good question. You have to think, what would drive somebody there rather than into professional therapy?
The way therapy works is
Yeah, the guys who take you in a room alone may be taking a wrong turn. Okay? What's the wrongness of that turn they may be taking?
assuming that it's private and interior.
So the assumption that there's a primary private self that is ahistorical, that's somehow independent of culture or only a function of things as small as the family unit, she thinks is a bad assumption, not a dependable assumption. What do you think about that?
I agree with her. I think it's social. I think that's social.
Okay. Now what I'm trying to get you to do is I want to stand up as a grown-up and say, look, this is where I stand in this issue. Okay? This is where I put my money. I go with this kind of, or at least let me entertain it for a while and see where it takes me. So in other words, when you read a book like that, you're called upon to take a stand, or at least relative stand, with respect to certain claims about reality. And she's got a hunch, and you may share a hunch, or you may not. There's got to be people in here who think she's all wrong. Anybody?
I would say that it's more nuanced than she's making it up. Like I would actually kind of go for a hybrid model between Like it seems like these are two extremes where it's completely social or completely inherent and private. And I would say that, like, I would consider my personal inner life as not being completely ahistorical.
Good. See, that's all right, but
or
it's
completely-
partly that.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're a guy. Do you write music?
Yeah, times.
And you're interested in people who do.
Yeah.
And one of the assumptions in the rock gods is what? What assumption do rock gods make? Which rappers may or may not make. I'm not sure. We'll get into just a second. You ever thought about that? These guys who write songs and have a lot of hair and destroy hotel
But it
rooms.
applies to
There's-
other people's lives.
What?
But it applies to other people's lives. But it's,
But what do they think
But
they're
it's so-
doing when they write songs?
well, they're like pouring their inner self.
Now, do they value their inner self?
Absolutely.
They think it's really important. They think it can be expressed symbolically. They think they can get out there and provoke inner selfness in the jobbers who pay the money to go to the concert, right? And they genuinely think that, these
Yeah.
guys. But they privilege that kind of inner private experience and really reject, by their very lifestyle, the idea that they're formed by society. It's kind of an
Which
implicit
is
rebellion.
really-
Now, the rapper's a little bit different. They're talking about what it's like to be in the hood with a lot of other guys, yes.
Can you say, I mean, everything's constructed, but at the same time, there's some sense of self-difference in everyone or other.
And you have that, don't you? You think you're different?
I mean, as different.
Irreducibly different and unique, even within a cultural range. You do, don't you? Elsewise, why would you write a contract, right? Which ironically is a public document that's completely constructed. But we're told that it expresses and a good. Yeah, what were you going to say before?
Oh, I was just going to say that Michael and I were just in a Russian literature class and we read A War and Peace, and they were talking about how every person has two different kinds of life they're living simultaneously. They have like the historically contingent life and the personal life.
See that? And are they different things? Do you believe that?
Yeah.
You think there is a rock god in you,
Yes.
okay, as well as perhaps a socially constructed. So when you come to the issue of your death, what do you think? What do you think with respect to death? Are you a rock god of your own death? Or are you a socially constructed being whose mind is inherently social?
I think the socially constructed part is a little less subjugated to dying in a way because it's a little more a part of people outside of you. I think it's more of the rock god that goes away and the socially constructed person who continues to exist.
So the rock god disappears?
Right.
So you really believe in that Platonic soul?
Maybe.
All right, let me add something I didn't add last time about the soul. If Plato is right, and we all have a kind of ahistorical soul, it's also an asexual soul. Think about that. Gender does not go all the way down for Plato, nor can it ever. This did not lead to openness among the sexes, by the way, because it was believed, generally speaking, that being male was much higher on the ontological or metaphysical or philosophical food chain as an expression of soul than being female. Because female bodies were far more tied to the earth because they were tied to reproduction and cycles and all that sort of thing. So the idea that everybody has a same soul did not lead to liberation, but to the opposite, okay? As people tend to may be able to manage, yes.
We don't have to talk about this now, but I definitely wanted to go over the whole section in the book about female sexuality and decomposition because it was kind of convoluted and I wasn't sure what she was getting at with it.
What do you think she was getting at?
I mean, I understood the part about sort of the belief that ejaculation is kind of like a death and it's creating a rebirth in a sense because you're making a child, it's creating life. So that spawns life in the whole Phoenix type situation.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure.
Why do women have more to do with rot than with regeneration?
I'm not sure because it seems like they have everything to do with regeneration, especially in the process.
No, they
of
don't.
pregnancy.
They're the vessels of carrying see man. Okay? But women themselves, according to this, according to tradition, are closer to death than men are. Okay? Because they're closer to the cycles of nature and earth. Women are, and they're more polluted. Okay, why are women dirtier than men? And therefore closer to death and closer to corruption.
They bleed?
Yeah, they bleed, yeah. Why is that dirt? You bleed too.
Not regularly.
So they bleed regularly. Where do they bleed? From their nose?